I call the Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Mr Speaker, this legislation puts in place a proper regulatory regime for the 600 million hectares of ocean for which New Zealand has responsibility. Mr Speaker, it's good law, it's long overdue, and it fills a significant gap in New Zealand's environmental laws. I want to commend the Minister for the Environment, Amy Adams, for the work that she has done on it, particularly over the last 3 months in refining this bill with her supplementary order paper. I do want to say how disappointed I am that the Labour opposition has chosen to oppose this bill. They are a party that is opposing for opposition's sake, and I want to expose some of their arguments. The member who's just spoken, who made a great deal out of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. I have a very simple question for that party and members that are opposing this bill. How do we meet our obligations under that convention with no environmental law at all in the exclusive economic zone?
They did it for 9 years.
For 9 years, Labour did not have any regime of independent environmental assessments at all. They did 16 deep wells without it. And did a single Labour member say, hey, woo, stop, we're not meeting our international obligations under the law of the sea? There was not so much as a peek from the Labour Party, and for that matter, from the Greens. And then we come to the issue of why not make it more consistent with the Resource Management Act. And let me make this point very simply, because I do not believe Labour seriously believes this was simply an exercise in extending the RMA's jurisdiction out to the exclusive economic zone. The RMA sets up a very complex system of national policy statements, regional policy statements, district plans, all of these documents that can take, in total, up to 9 years to complete the regulatory process for managing the environment. We are expecting at most, Mr Speaker, 6 consents per year under this regime, as compared with 40,000 a year under the RMA. Does Labour seriously argue that we should have the complete fabric of RMA, national, regional and district planning documents out in the exclusive economic zone? I don't seriously believe they do. I believe they are simply clinging at straws to try and find some excuse to oppose this important environmental statute. The member who's just spoken has claimed that National has not taken any account of the worst environmental tragedy to occur in the last couple of decades, the Gulf of Mexico. In fact, this government immediately commissioned an independent review of both our maritime transport, our RMA and our proposed EEZ legislation to ensure that we did learn the lessons from the Gulf of Mexico, and those recommendations are contained in this very bill that Parliament now debates. The final point that was made by Moana Maki was that we should have appeals to the Environment Court on any decisions that are made by the Environmental Protection Authority in respect of consents or declines that might be made under this EEZ legislation. Well, I put this to the House. That is really a cop-out for saying that Labour does not want to see any resource use in the EEZ. I give a simple example. The previous government legislated very clearly that the issue of climate change should not be taken into account in resource consents. That is right now being appealed by Greenpeace off to the Environment Court. Anybody who read the Hansard would know that was deliberately the intent of the previous Labour government. If we are to allow appeals on points of substance before the Environment Court on the consents under this legislation, it will mean it will take up to 2 years to get a consent, at least an extra 18 months on process. Let's be honest, that will drive away any investment at all in the exclusive economic zone. And I do say, Mr. Speaker, this country has a larger area of continental shelf than any per head of capita. We on this side of the House say there are opportunities for us to be able to responsibly use those resources. If Labor is serious about going down that path, they should be honest and upfront and say they, in effect, refuse to have any use of the economic resources in that space. Mr. Speaker, I would draw your attention to each of the big pieces of environmental law that have been passed over the last couple of decades, whether it's been the Ozone Protection Law, whether it's been the Resource Management Act, whether it's been the Hazardous Substances Act, or this which is of similar moment, every one of those bills was passed with both National and Labor support. And it really is a cop-out for the Labor Party to be opposing this bill, dancing on the head of a pin over a few minor issues. Let's just follow what Labor's been saying in the course of this debate. In the first reading, they said would prefer the bill made reference to the principle of sustainable management. That's in the RMA. And that's done. They said at the time that they would prefer that we had higher fines. The fines have been increased and put up to $10 million. That's done. The only argument they have left is truly pathetic. They are saying that this bill requires decision makers to show caution when there is a lack of information, and they're saying they're opposing this bill because they would prefer that it use the precautionary principle. Well, can I put the record straight? Both in the committee stages and the contribution we had from Moana Maki, she said the language that is used in this bill has not ever been used before. Well, hello. Have a look at the Fisheries Act, passed and supported by the Labor Party, use exactly the same language as the exclusive economic legislation in respect of caution. And my simple question to members opposite, why would that language be acceptable in the fisheries environment, of which actually this bill includes a huge amount, but not appropriate language in this bill? Again, I think it reinforces that Labor is just absolutely desperate to oppose or find any excuse, and I think that speaks volumes about their broader problems in that they know what they are against, but not what they are for. Mr. Speaker, I want to conclude by just marking how significant this legislation is for New Zealand. We have the fourth largest exclusive economic zone and extended continental shelf of any country on this planet. I would say that if our country, New Zealand, cannot responsibly manage the ocean environment, who can? I say that it is absolutely consistent with New Zealand's Clean Green brand to show that we are able to responsibly manage that area. I think we need to be upfront about the fact, with the increased pressure for resources, that there is a higher level of interest in the minerals and other resources that exist within this huge ocean space. Equally so, with new technologies, it is becoming more accessible to be able to use those resources. And the position this government has taken, that we should pick up those economic opportunities, but it should be done so in an environmentally responsible way with independent environmental assessments, is the right way forward. Mr. Speaker, this bill puts a huge responsibility on the Environmental Protection Authority that this government created in 2009. We started with responsibilities for nationally significant projects, responsibility for hazardous organisms, new organisms, with the ETS legislation falling under their jurisdiction from December last year, and now with this new responsibilities in the area of the EEZ. In my view, it completes the creation of that important new authority. Mr. Speaker, the passage of this bill will raise new challenges for government around marine reserves, around marine mammals, and other things that we need to do in the ocean space to ensure that New Zealand is going best practice. But the passage of this bill is the most important step that New Zealand has taken in more than a decade to put our environmental laws into the state of which we can say that we are responsibly managing this country's huge natural resources.
I call Charles Cheval.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I want to deal with a number of the points that were